Namaste to everyone. This is Professor Venkatarama BR, Assistant Professor of English, Department of Collegiate and Technical Education, Government of Karnataka. Friends, I welcome you all to this Digital Learning Management System and Initiative of Government of Karnataka. Friends, this is the class for the students of Bcom 4th semester of Bengaluru North University and also for Bangalore University. Well, this is the 24th session where we are learning English language. And in this session, let me tell you, we are going to learn a poem titled as How Soon Hath the Time. This is a poem written by John Milton. Friends, let me remind you that we have already learned this poem in the session 22 and also session 23. In those sessions, we have learned some important things like introduction to the poet and introduction to the poem, and also stanza by stanza analysis of the poem. Friends, in this session, we are going to discuss some important topics. They include the critical analysis and appreciation of the poem, and also the themes of the poem, the tone and mood of the poem, poetic style, form and structure, images and symbols of the poem, and at last we are going to discuss the poetic devices used in the sonnet. I wish you have to stay till the end of the video so that you will understand the complete poem. I'm sure you will stay and watch this video and will enjoy this video till the end. Now let's move on to the session. The first and foremost topic of discussion in this video is critical analysis and appreciation of the poem. Well, for your examination, you will find a question like, write a critical appreciation of the sonnet, How Soon Hath Time? Or you will also find a question like, discuss how soon hath time as a progression from doubt to faith and the poet's surrender to the divine. Well, let me tell you, John Milton's poem, How Soon Hath Time, has various aspects, reflecting on his mood, conflict with beliefs, and his personal shortcomings, and most of all, the expediency of time. The basic premises are time and its cavalier indifference to individualistic attitude, irrespective altogether. In the sonnet, Milton laments how his years are running out, but he could not achieve much so far. His poetic career is concerned. In the opening line of the sonnet, the poet compares the time to the subtle thief of youth. It suggests that the time is a clever thief who steals a poet's youthful days secretly and without violence. The word wing introduces the image of the bird, and the word fly testifies the image. As a whole, in the eyes of Milton, time is a stealer bird that takes youth on a flight. Through this image, Milton wants to present time as being continually fleeting. So, Milton is keen to use time fruitfully and believes that we can only make the best use of time through producing significant poetry. In the first 8 lines, the poet regrets his days are flying hastily and his youth has produced no significant and fruitful works. He has arrived at adulthood, but his inner maturity has not yet appeared. The poem thus initially appears to be self-involved. A young person thinking through the meaning of his life, he flirts with a Catholic position. In the first 8 lines, the poem suggests that the value of his life comes from his works. In the final 6 lines, the poet returns to a Puritan position. God grants the value of his life, and thus his task is to surrender himself to God's plan and accomplish it as best as he can. Making this correction, the speaker suggests that the value of his life depends on God, not on himself. He hopes, in a sustate, that sooner or late, less or more, his spirit shall be equal to the same lot as other spirits have had in youth. However, higher load, time will lead him to the same fate by the will of the God. If he has the grace to use his talent, he will prove successful in the eyes of God, who is a great taskmaster. We come across the image of late spring that suggests late youth. The poet is now 23 years old and so he has attained late spring. But the poet's late youth bears neither bud nor blossoms. Here, bud and blossom suggests production by way of writing poetry. Thus, the poet overcomes his regret, leaving an impression of his Puritanism, his absolute faith in his providence. Neither at the same time he has personified time here, nor as to their bird, but as the guide, the arbiter of destiny. The sonnet blends paganism and Christianity in harmony. Friends, the poem, owing to its strength and vigor, has stood the test of millenniums as a firm ode to Puritan age poetry, among other notables such as Paradise Lost, Samson Agonistes, and Lycidas. The images in the sonnet have made it a perfect blend of paganism and Christianity, and they testify to the poet's absolute faith in God. The poem was a vital literary work in a long movement of poetry stirring in England. John Milton's monotonous tragic sonnet has tones of ambition, religious bent, and a maestro in the making of his magnum opus, Paradise Lost, released afterwards. Friends, now let's move on to another topic of discussion, that is the themes of the poem. For your examination, you will find a question like, comment on the themes of the poem, how soon at the time. Or you may find an alternative question like, discuss Milton's theme of youth and time in the sonnet, how soon at the time. Yeah, let us move on to the discussion. Let us know well in advance that John Milton opted for rather pedantic themes such as personal issues, politics, and even friendship. Let us discuss some of the important themes of the poem, How Soon Hath Time. Friends, let us move on to the next topic of discussion, that is Milton's theme of youth in the sonnet, How Soon Hath Time. I am sure this kind of topics will be asked for 5 marks for your university examination. Yeah, let us discuss the topic. The theme centers on Milton's fear that time is quickly passing by and he hasn't accomplished all that he hoped to attain. The speaker in the sonnet, How Soon Hath Time, has had just his 24th birthday and is thinking about how quickly the first 3 and 28 years went by. The speaker feels that the period of youth in his life is now finished and his time of adulthood is at his hand, even if he does not outwardly look like an adult. Even though Milton was 24 years old at the time of the poem was written, he struggles with the idea that he is now an educated man with little to show for his life. The theme of the poem suggests that youth is fleeting, so you must make good use of your time and talents. Milton's educational experience were not all positive, like leading to his dissatisfaction with his accomplishments. The theme of the poem focuses on Milton's disappointment that he has little to show for his career or education. We remember the words, my hasting days fly on with full career, but my late spring no bud or blossom sheweth. Nonetheless, Milton trusts God to make a way for him to use his talents in the future. Friends, now let's pass on to the another topic of discussion, that is The theme of passage of time. This may also be asked for about 5 marks in our university examinations. Let us have a discussion. Milton's sonnet explores the idea of time as a guide to his destiny. Milton calls time the subtle thief of youth because time steals without awareness. The poet wrote this sonnet after Milton's 23rd birthday, and already the poet is thinking about the approach of his 24th birthday. The poet sees how time steals the days away from him and is not even aware of each day passing. The poet notes how he has planned to accomplish so many things, yet instead he feels he has spent too much time studying and learning. What he considers the promise of his youth has come to no fruition. He uses the words, no but a blossom showeth. In lines 5 through 8, the poet suggests that time can deceive others since he still appears to be young. But Milton knows the truth. That time has stolen his youth. In the final lines of the poem, Milton changes direction and the sustained response to the problem expressed in the octave. Time which steals the youth is also bringing him closer to God. This religious interpretation of the time expresses the Renaissance notion that passing time will bring humankind closer to the final meeting with God. Milton thus justifies his use of time because regardless of how he spends it, time is on his side, bringing him closer to his God. Friends, now let's move on to another topic of discussion, that is the theme of crisis of faith. The poet's choice can resolve the crisis created by his awareness of passing time to put his future in God's hand. In the first 8 lines of the poem, Milton worries that time has passed too quickly. He has been at Cambridge studying but has had little time to fulfill what he sees as his destiny. Milton is aware he is a talented poet, but instead of writing poetry, he has been studying. This precipitates a crisis in faith for the poet, who worries he has wasted his precious time. But maybe the poet's talent, which be it less or more, will be less when he is mature. The poet worries, although he is confident of his future. In the final 6 lines of the poem, Milton acknowledges that time, whether soon or slow, will inevitably lead him to God. This is the same future that all men will face, however mean or high. Time will lead Milton to God if he can accept the limitations of earthly time. In the last lines, Milton finds the answer to his problem in giving control over his life to God, and as a result, his crisis of faith. Friends, now let's come to the topic of discussion, that is the theme of predestination and the free will. Friends, John Milton is incorporating both Calvinist ideas of predestination and the Anglican Church's emphasis on the free will into his poem. The poem's octave, the first 8 lines, focuses on the problem of free will. Milton has chosen his course of study, and as a result, he has neglected his talents, that is writing poetry. This time, the time spent on academics has flourished and flown, as he acknowledges in the line 3, my yesterday days fly on with full career. But now, as he readies himself to leave Cambridge, he must face awareness of his last time. In the poem's sustet, the last 6 lines of the poem, Milton moves towards a resolution, which he finds in embracing both the Calvinistic idea of predestination and the Anglican promise of free will. He can reconcile his wasted youth if he gives the choice to God. He has not wasted his youth, since it moves him closer to God. That is the will of heaven. The next line, if I have grace to visit so, takes the poem back to the free will. The poet's talent will grow and develop if Milton does so. Because Milton played with this opposition, human effort, and the divine will be partners in Milton's future. Friends, now let's move on to the topic of discussion, that is the theme of journey. Well, Milton chooses this sonnet to symbolize the poet's journey from doubt to self-discovery. He feels guilty about his time spent studying when he has not published anything. He is slow to mature, and by late spring and no better blossoms shoot. But in the line 9, the pronoun it, whose antecedent is unclear, but which is usually thought to refer to the poet's maturity, might suggest that the poet's talent will ripen with maturity, that rather than having wasted his youth, the poet has been making time until he is mature enough to create this kind of poetry he feels destined to create. As the poet nears his age 24, the poet feels he is at the border between youth and manhood, a time to which he has arrived so near. He worries that when he reaches maturity, his talent may be less rather than more. Although worried, he is confident in his abilities. The sonnet moves the poet from hesitance and questioning of youth to the realization that perhaps he will achieve all he wishes. The sustet is filled with obscure reference. It more or less, soon or slow. There are contradictions and uncertainties, all of which indicate that the journey will not always be clear. Ultimately, the poet feels the journey will bring him success. He intends to please God and use his abilities as best as he can. The journey is to reaffirm the poet's faith in God and to find a place in the world. Now let's move to the tone and mood of the poem. What is this tone and mood of the poem? Let us understand first. The mood is the feeling created by the poet for the reader, whereas the tone is the feeling displayed by the author towards the subject of the poem. Then, mood and tone often depend on one another to get across what the author is trying to portray in the poem. Well, with this background, let us come to the discussion. Now let's move on to the concept or a topic, the tone of frustration and despair of the poet. The sonnet, How Soon Hath Time, begins with the tone of frustration and despair. The initial 8 verses reflect doubt and melancholia. In the octave, the poet laments the passage of 23 years of his life, especially the 23rd year. The speaker's anxiety in the first 8 lines may have less to do with the scale of accomplishments and more to do with whether he has grace. Time is pictured as a subtle thief of youth, which has wings and has carried away his 23 years of life. He is growing by age, but the spring of his life has seen no better blossom. The poet fears that he has not achieved anything in his life despite crossing 23 years. In the fact that he has yet to accomplish much might be sign that God hasn't given him grace. Or it may be a sign that God's plan for the speaker is humble and quiet. The speaker cannot be sure yet which is true. In the second half of the octave, the poet states that though he has attained manhood, he does not look at his age. He despises not only being masculine but also a failure in life as a poet and also a respectable man of high standing. Though he is a man now, he does not have mature looks, nor does he find an inward rightness. The poet feels sad that some people are so well endowed at the proper time. In contrast to such happy spirits, the poet briefly touches that aspect of his immaturity. He deems himself incompetent and lacking in poetic abilities. Friends, now let's move on to another topic. The topic is the change in the tone and mood of the poem. For your examination, we find a question like narrate the change in the tone and mood of the poem. Or you may find a question, alternative question like discuss how soon after time is a progression from doubt to faith and the poet's surrender to the divine. Typical of the Petrarchian sonnet, there is a tonal change as well as change in the mood and emotions of the poet. The sonnet is a progression from doubt to faith and is surrendered to the divine. The initial 8 verses reflect doubt and melancholia, while the last 6 verses reflect resolve and immediacy. The first 2 lines of the poem, How Soon at the Time, establish the poet's initial concerns as the speaker reflects on his life. In the octave, the initial 8 lines, the poet laments the passage of 23 years of his life. The speaker or the poet feels a sense of loss as though time has deprived him of something vital and precious. Far from being satisfied with what he has accomplished, he feels that his life is flying by. Thus, the sonnet begins with a tone of frustration and desperation. Time is pictured as a subtle thief of youth, which has wings and it has carried away his 23 years of life. He is growing by age, but the spring of his life has seen no better blossom. He fears that he has not achieved anything in his life despite crossing 23 years. In the second half of the octave, the poet states that though he has attained manhood, he does not look at his age. He has that physical immaturity that has made him look very young and effeminate. He despises not only being masculine but also a failure in life as a poet and also as a respectable man of high standing. Physical immaturity seems to go hand in hand with mental, psychological, and intellectual immaturity. Though he is a man now, he does not have mature looks, nor does he find inward rightness. He feels sad that some people are so well endowed at the proper time. Eventually, the mood changes. There is introspection and acceptance. The transitional but signals a change from impatient arrogance of the octave into the humbler prayer of the sestet. The poet comes to terms with the reality. He feels that all he needs is time and necessarily along with it the blessings of God. He will one day, sooner or later, in a large amount or small, bless him. It is destiny. He realizes he would indeed be blessed by God and his fortune may change for the better. The poet feels that right now it is a destiny allotted by God and accordingly he has to carry out his part of the duty and wait patiently. The poet dreams of a day when the God blesses him in his own strictest measure. He would bless him with a sense of creativity that he would bloom to be a better poet. In the last line, the poet refers to the God as a taskmaster. A taskmaster job is to extract work, and God will make him strive hard so that one day he would be a greater poet, because that is what he feels God intends him to be. Thus, the sonnet ends with the tone of hope and consolation. Friends, now let's move on to the topic of discussion, that is poetic style, form and structure. The structure of John Milton's poem House One at Time is very much unique. He composed the sonnet in a traditional Petrarchan prose form. Initially, these Italian sonnets were used to express an abject suitor's desire or love for a reluctant woman. Sonnets were first written in England in the 16th century and had fallen out of fashion by the time Milton began writing them. Early in the 17th century, the poets transfigured the sonnet into a way to worship God. A whole new wave of poets, including John Donne, George Herbert, John Milton, took this new format in a completely different direction. Milton's poem exemplifies the problem solution organization of the octave sestet sonnet form. We similarly found the lines in a strong iambic pentameter which suggests an underlying temporal regularity. The sonnet form divides the poem's 14 lines into two parts. The first part being an octave and the second being a sestet. Each stanza of the poem combines 4 verses, fitting the iambic pentameter aptly. The first 2 lines form single grammatical unit with an endowment at the end of line 1 and an end stop at the end of line 2. This establishes a pattern that will hold through the first 8 lines of the poem, alternating endowment and end stop lines. It garnishes cohesive thoughts in their entirety. The poem introduces here 2 rhyme sounds that will recur throughout its first 8 lines. Uth, UTH and EAR. The rhyme scheme for the octave initial 8 lines is typically ABBA, ABBA. The rhyming pattern for the sestet, the last 6 lines, is CDA, DCE. Rhyming patterns are coherent with the diverting belief systems. Youth rhymes with showeth, while the truth rhymes with endureth. Similarly, appear, near, career, and year also rhyme together. The initial 8 verses reflect doubt and melancholia. The octave's purpose is to introduce the problem, express a desire, reflect a reality, or otherwise present a situation that causes doubt. It usually does this by introducing problem within its first quartile, unified 4-line section, and developing it into the second. We know the beginning of the sestet as the word term, and it introduces a pronounced change in the tone in the sonnet. change in the rhyme scheme marks a turn. Such text purpose is to make a comment on the problem or to apply a solution to it. Adhering strictly to form and meter, his poetic emotions remain tightly bolted up. Each verse comprises 5 beats. The biblical connotations towards the concluding verses strengthen the airy symbolism in initially lighter verses. John Milton has slightly bent the rules by strengthening the lengths of the verse to save the poem's form. Friends, now let's move on to the images and symbols in the sonnet. How soon after time? The images in the sonnet have made it a perfect blend of paganism and Christianity, and they testify to the poet's absolute faith in God. In line 2, Milton describes time as a creature with wings. And again, in the line 3, evokes imagery of flight. More broadly, wings themselves are a rich symbol that suggests Christianity's deep connection to and authority over the past. As a whole, in the eyes of Milton, time is a stiller bird that takes youth on flight. Through this image, Milton wants to present time as a being continually flitting. We come across the image of late spring, which suggests late youth. The poet is now 23 years of age, and so he has attained late youth. The poet's late youth bears neither bud nor blossom. Here, bud and blossom suggests production by way of writing poetry. The poet overcomes his regret, leaving an impression of his Puritanism, his absolute faith in providence. The symbol of spring thus serves a double purpose. On the other hand, spring as a symbol also shows that Milton himself is out of joint with his own culture. He understands its resources, but he refuses to use them the way that other poets do. Friends, now let's move on to the discussion on the topic, the poetic devices used in the poem. The poetic devices are also called as figures of speeches used in the poem. Now let us discuss some of the important figures of speeches used in the poem. First and foremost thing, it's called alliteration. How soon after time makes frequent use of alliteration. For example, how and hath in the line 1 and bud and blossom in line 4. Milton establishes a strong chain of repeating yes sound, which is more specifically an example of sibilance, which appears in soon, settle and stolen. The poet also creates a repeated F, B and T sounds throughout. Alliteration at times suggests an underlying connection between rather disparate concepts throughout the poem, such as time, theft, flight, youth, and spring. In the second half of the poem, one is struck by the more direct and immediate connections between alliterating words. For example, grace and great in lines 13 and 14. This conceptual and sonic connection is also evident in words like skill and skip test, soon and slow, which all generally relate to that idea of motion and control. Now let's move on to the second figures of speech or poetic device that's called personification. The first line of the poem, how soon after time, personifies time and figuratively describes it as the thief that steals poet's youth. Friends, now let's move to another concept of discussion, that is the figure of speech, that's metaphor. Metaphor is the most dominant literary device used in the poem. The poet uses a metaphor to describe the passage of time and the process of aging. The poet extends the metaphor of time as a thief, but the wing suggesting time's rapid flight. Friends, now let's move on to the another figure of speech that is called allusion. The poet continues his allusion into the third line, writing, "My wasting days fly on with full career," a clue to the fact that he has no career other than watching his days pass. The poet also wonders whether he might possess an inward ripeness less visible to the exterior gaze, resembling that of some more timely happy spirits. Thanks for watching this video, friends. I am sure you will find it most useful for your examination and comprehension point of view. I hope you would stay back for some more videos to watch in this YouTube channel. Thank you very much.